Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and I'm helping families and households live life beyond the budget and within their means, myself included. And today's going to be an interesting one because I've been on a budgeting theme in terms of studying cash flow of my clients as well as cash flow within my own household. I thought it'd be fun to look back at my budget, my very first budget from 2009, it looks like. And I wanted to emphasize this again that budget is a noun and a verb. And I haven't looked it up in the dictionary, so go ahead, prove me wrong. That's fine. But there's creating a thing, a budget, and then there's budgeting, right? And budgeting involves looking back at past data, judgment free, deciding on what your goals are today, and then how you may or may not adjust the past data in the future. There's a couple shortcuts you can use. It doesn't take maniacal to perfect data. In fact, perfect data can distract you from the real work you need to do in budgeting. But you do need, you know, accurate, precise data, right? Data that can be replicated. So you're tracking trends over time. And I will say only about 30 to 40% of my clients require any sort of extensive cash flow work, and that might even be generous. If you're saving enough to reach your goals, which implies you know what your goals are and implies you're actually saving, and it's not saving that comes back for a travel budget, but for longer term savings, generally speaking, you don't have to deliberate your Starbucks purchases or wherever purchases. That just comes down to values, which I'd like to do a deeper dive on as a video. So if you'd like to see values in budgeting, leave me a comment. But let's get started here. I'm intrigued. I haven't seen this. It looks like I haven't edited it since 2013, so it'll be interesting to see what we have. So these are, all my budgets. I have more recent budgets that I've done that aren't included in here, and that's fine. But let's go back. So 2009, this is the oldest one. I was probably didn't, we'll know when it started. So let's see, 25 going on 26. I was I'd already been self-employed for a couple of years, and I may have just taken on a job. One of my clients turned into a full-time job. I'd actually worked at that full-time job years prior, when I was 21. And I finished college when I was 21, a little bit early. Lucky me. Also lucky finances, because any amount you finish early is not more college fees you have to pay. And since 2000, since the year 2000, I had in earnest been reading personal finance books. So 2000 was my last semester in college, and I was supposed to be writing political science papers rather than in international political science papers. Rather than doing that, I was procrastinating, turned everything in a couple days late, had to make a lot of excuses, maybe was even dishonest. But I made it, guys. It happened. My lesson there is probably that it wasn't necessarily the right major, interesting topic to study, maybe with online learning, but I could have had a better fit for what I was actually studying, which probably would have been accounting and business in the end, or finance. So, finance. So I was looking at a lot of personal finance books, and they always said track what you spend. So I remember journaling. I had some cute journals. I'd dabble in journaling, never a consistent practice. And I'd be like, okay, coffee, latte, $2.50, because that's how much it cost. And I'm like, why is it not costing $2.50 today? Our minds get so anchored, obviously inflation, and rightfully so in some cases, not all. So, I'm like studying this, and I'm like, I'm not making any progress. I don't get tracking your expenses. There's one thing of like writing it down and being more mindful, but what is it getting to? And I believe at the time, okay, great. So interesting. This is 2010, but let's go to 2009. Okay, so I was 25 when I started this. I think in my life, age 25, 26 was a real turning point for me. it was an age where I decided that, hey, I get the whole finish college thing, no debt thing, and get a job thing. But I'm having a hard, I mean, I pretty much was on my own financially at 21. There was no more gifting and no more loans, all that sort of thing. I get the whole idea behind maybe not how to succeed in life, but at least how to get a start, how to launch. But I feel like I'm floundering. I'm paycheck to paycheck. I'm not advancing. Like a friend of mine bought a car all by himself. And I was like, I'm nowhere near that. Even though I'd started a business, I had my own clients, I'd filed my own taxes on my own. Like I've done a lot of things in my life at that point. And maybe this is just something about the Bay Area as well as my own immaturity, but 25, 26 is really when I felt like maybe I was coming into being an adult. And I was like, I really want to understand this money stuff. So they say track your expenses. And I'd always had a little bit more interest in, using a tool to help me. So I created this budgeting spreadsheet where I could keep track of my income and keep track of my expenses and basically get the difference. In addition, I was tracking my net worth. So, cute cash in pocket, $60. Nothing's changed, guys. I definitely don't even keep 60 these days. I have my Apple Pay. What else, right? Checking account balance, my PayPal balance, my savings balance, and my money market balance. But I did have a high yield savings account in 2009 that I had opened. If I didn't open it in 2009, it was shortly beforehand. I had a Roth IRA. All right, go me. My dad had gifted me some stock shares that did well and then didn't do well, but I was able to capture the loss. So I guess there's something there. I had a car. I was just checking the value of the car. I had a car loan that I had, and I had various different credit cards. I would never probably advise store credit cards, but I see the game. Maybe you want to use your store credit card or open an account. And there's pluses and minuses to it, guys. If you have questions, leave a comment. I'll do one on store credit cards. And this was a credit union credit card. Um, so tracking my net worth over time. What what I personally love about this is like I also had my net without the car. I mean, that's pretty cool. So from April to December of tracking my expenses, I went from a net worth without my vehicle of $1,600. That's pretty low, guys. That's like not a lot. That means I had some savings. But the savings, it doesn't matter because I had a loan, right? So if I emptied out all my savings, paid off the loan, I'd only be left with $1,600. That's what a net worth statement shows you. It's basically, I mean, people in finance and accounting will correct me on this, but I figure this is a good example of solvency, right? If you had to pay off all your debts, what would you be left with? And in this case, I could have sold the car, I suppose, and had additional value, but in order to function in my life, it was something I needed. That's not a functional thing to think through, but businesses might consider their assets on a higher level, like the property they own, and a bit more of context here. And what could I get for a $25,000 car at the time? Probably, maybe this is more accurate because I was tracking. I actually worked in automotive industry here and there from an online marketing standpoint, so I was aware of how to track the value of my car and depreciation and things like that. Um, but look at I increased it to $14,608. That's remarkable. That is remarkable. So I was paying beyond the minimum payment on my car loan because I do remember I paid it off in about 2.5, 3 years on a 5-year loan. What else? I mean, this stock went up. That's not in my control. So maybe we'll call it just 14,000, right? Who cares? Um, the majority of this came from savings. Oops. And some stock market growth. Okay. Hey, 2009, important to note, was a market low. So anything I had invested at this point, I don't know what was at a loss, but I do know that I continued to invest and buy and so on and so forth. I have a really good story about that, actually, how I started investing my first funds. Um, but I mean, if you want to hear about it, leave a comment. It's a very good story, and it was about this time frame too. So I was able to buy in at the market at the low. So I think a lot of times when new grads talk about how they graduated in a recession, functionally, I think I did graduate. I don't know, not in a recession, because I think 2001 was the dot-com bubble bust. So it was pretty tumultuous with students in my college. It was an expensive private out-of-state college in terms of who's going to stay, who can afford it, et cetera. I think both my parents got laid off when I was in college, in tech. Uh, and then what else happened? So I don't know if I was really like in a booming economy when I graduated college in 2001. It was a struggle actually to even understand how I found a job or find a job, particularly because I wasn't any longer interested in my major. I had worked in politics in DC. I'd worked at a lobbying firm as an intern and had immense amount of exposure. Unfortunately, that exposure led me down this path that said, I'm not sure this is how I want to be spending my time for work. Again, probably more topics there. I don't know what's right or wrong. I was young, but I followed my gut, and my gut was, let's go back to California. I've got no money. Let's start making some money and then make some choices. So that was really my mission. Great, 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 great. And this is something I always love pointing out. So I, in earnest, was tracking my money April of 2009, which is a tax month. And look at this. I was under 2 months out of that year. I had spent more than I made, which means, and 3 months, which means that 9-month year in total, I spent more than I made by $1,600. I think that's pretty interesting. You can see I tried to make an ideal budget. Now, let me see if I have savings on here. Um, Savings, Roth IRA. Okay. So what that tells me is I treat savings contributions as an expense. And I think everyone should. And what that means is that I wasn't technically, I was spending more than I made. So I could use savings, which is an expense, to supplement, right? It just means I hadn't quite gauged the right savings total relative to what I was spending. I could spend less, and I think this is, wow. So it's probably more than I spend now outside of my mortgages, guys. Me individually was spending more on rent and everything than I spend on my mortgages. So interesting that 25-year-old me was living high on the hog compared to today. Um, Tracking my income. And look at this. I was doing a lot of research surveys online that paid pretty decent. I had 2 different pay sources. I had my interest indicated. I don't think I would do that today. I was selling things on eBay. I was doing more surveys. Um, I rented out my car to a friend who got reimbursed for mileage, so I was able to, capture some of that. Let's see. Some gifts, right? That's nice. I used to drive my dad to the airport. He was a consultant, and his company would reimburse him, and he'd reimburse me. I guess I sold selling clothes. I think I went to Plato's Closet at the time, but I probably paid like $5 in gas just to do that. Maybe not. So I was self-employed, dog sitting, house sitting. Yeah. So very interesting to me to see my income sources, my expenses. Uh, see, iced vanilla coffee, guys, $2.40. Whew. I think that'd be like 4 or 5 or $6 now. Annual city parking permit, my rent. I lived in below market housing, which is another interesting topic for big cities. It just means that I had highly subsidized rent. It's a game, it's a system. If you have questions on that, let's talk. Leave a comment and we'll do it. Auto insurance for 6 months. I've never done monthly auto insurance payments. I've only paid in full for 6 months. This is what I pay about a month now with all our vehicles. Interesting enough. Nice. Go feminism, birth control, PG&E, cable, which I was really resistant to get. Okay. Anyways, everything. So what does all this translate and mean, right? I took those monthly totals and made the sums here. So even though I'd been tracking my expenses for 9 months, including my contributions to savings, I was spending more than I was making, right? And this is called $0 budgeting, where essentially you want this figure, your year end, I made this much total from your W-2. I spent this much and all my savings is zero. It's called $0 budgeting. It can be a little demoralizing, and that's another topic to talk about if you're interested in. But, you know, the fact that I had a sizable increase to my net worth, right? So if January wasn't any better, presumably the $16,000 net worth, much of it came from investment gains. So let's be mindful of that. Like if you increased your net worth by 10x every year, do the math, right? 1,600 times 10 is 16,000. That is so tremendous. And I was self-employed during this time, a 25-year-old, just figuring life out. So, and to know that I was under meant I had some adjustments to do, but I wouldn't have even known this had I not done this exercise. So how did I do it? On the expenses, what I was doing was some of these were online payments, so you can keep track of that. Look, I paid my own health insurance, $56 a month, guys, in 2009. $56. That's it. That's so low. I didn't yet have access to this anywhere outside of my computer, and I don't even know. I had a desktop. I didn't even have a laptop except for maybe work no, I had a laptop because I was self-employed. So I had a laptop and I could access this anywhere because it's a Google spreadsheet on the internet. I created it myself. I'm sure I looked at other people's budgeting templates, but I had to build my own to use it. And this wasn't that hard. There's nothing really fancy about it. And I didn't yet have an iPhone at the time, I don't think. So I couldn't access it on my phone at that time. Or if I could, I didn't. So it was really largely collecting, when point of sale or when you buy something, it gives you a receipt. I'd save all my receipts in my wallet. And then at the end of the day or the end of the week, I would just enter them in. And because that's a lot of work, I probably spent less because of that. But it's not that much work. What are we talking about here? Let's do this. For all of July of 2009, 43 cells or 43 rows of data, 43 times 3, so like 130 things to input once a month. And if I didn't get a receipt, I usually had a pen on me or I tried to remember, or I'd remember later in the day and I would write on another receipt, like, coffee, $2.40. That's it, right? So I didn't care about the date as long as I got the month right, as you can see. And it got easier because I knew some of my fixed expenses. I knew what internet was going to be. It was DSL at the time. I knew what my wireless bill would be, my phone for landline, etc. So I kind of like knew I could just copy these first few months and put them over. I did some fancy work on categorizing, but honestly, I don't know if I did much with the categorizing. Yeah, I'm just looking to see. So even though I was tracking categorizing, I hadn't yet gotten that far, right? So I couldn't tell you unless I did a fancy graph right now, which I could do now. I don't even know if I knew how to do that in Excel or spreadsheets at the time. Okay, so that's 2009. 2010, hey, I'm nothing if not consistent. So my total income went up a little bit, my expenses went up a little bit, and by the way, I consistently overspend, right? So all the work. And you can see January and February were tough to recover from. My income dropped dramatically. I'm not sure why. Don't care to look. But let's see my net worth without my car, 17 to 23,000. Interesting. Well, we'll take December's total. So excellent growth there. And car went down in value. Oh, well, that doesn't matter. So my, net worth with car also went up, barely went up. And this was starting to go to zero, these stock shares. It's why you shouldn't buy individual stocks. Great. Look, I'd started my first 401k. Oh, so cute. Before that, I'd only been invested in the Roth IRA. So we can talk about the order to do that and what makes sense. I didn't have a 401k match. I never had a 401k before that. I mean, I did, but never had a match and didn't participate. So in this case, I thought, let's see if I can even max out my Roth IRA. I don't know if I was at that point, but I was putting some away. But certainly by this point, I was making an effort to max out my Roth IRA. And I was trying to do it on consistent payments each month. So, excuse me, every month, $500 in or whatever it was. Um, so that was something I was doing. And then the 401k I just started. And honestly, I don't even think, I mean, I look like I'm putting maybe, I don't know, 10 or 20%. Maybe there was a match. I don't think so though, but it really was adding up. Again, this was just after market lows. 2008 and 2009 were the bottom of the market for the Great Recession. That's a big event. So I'm buying in when values are like the tiniest they've been in a decade, and they'd go on to double. So little amounts that really added up. And, I mean, okay, these are net amounts up here. So I'm making like 50, 60K a year, which I know is pretty high for mid 20s, I guess. But that's remarkable. So in taking serious, so I have automatic payments that I scheduled to top up my savings accounts. And their target date, right? This is my travel fund, my automotive fund, my beauty fund, my gifts fund, and my Roth IRA. So each month I'm putting some money away. And look, down to zero, right? So I take them out too, and then I fill them back up later. And it looks like because I had spent a lot there, might have been a tax bill that I had to pay. Who knows? When you're self employed, that happens. But, look at the progress here. Increased my Roth IRA. Look at the progress here. You know, even though my car value went down and these shares went down, they dropped 75%. I was still in aggregate across all things, increasing my net worth. And I don't know. To me, this was very doable. I do remember more in 2008 and 9 feeling pretty broke, but not feeling so broke here. Um, you know, considering I could save and whatnot. Some things that I don't have in line here. I don't have an emergency fund, so my target date funds became my emergency fund. That's probably not the best thing to do. It's a little demoralizing because what? I'm not going to travel? No, I'm probably still going to find a way to make it work. I'm in my 20s and living in a big city. So I should have had an emergency fund. I do notice that I pay off my credit cards in full, so that's exciting to know. I never really liked keeping a balance on my credit card, and if I do, it's once in a while. Otherwise, I like to pay that down to zero every month. Still do. Um, so great. This is pretty cool. Biggest takeaways are that it works, but if you include the amounts that go into savings, don't be demoralized if you're at zero or below zero or spending more than you make. So, had I had an emergency fund, I probably wouldn't end up so much in this situation, I think. But yeah. So, am I spending beyond my means? I don't know. Maybe if you include the savings amount. It's certainly better than if I had no money going to savings each month and just, spending beyond. That's where you get into trouble. And let's see, expenses. What's my savings rate? So if rent went up, auto insurance went down. That's great. Most of these stayed about on average similar. Okay, 600. Oh, I did have an emergency fund. I must have changed the names of those though. So I had 600 going into savings, only 100 a month going into an emergency fund, right? You could be 10. It's really the system that matters over time. 401k. Oh, these are my ideals. That's why. Never mind. Okay. So, oh, rent was much higher. PG&E Dish Network, wireless, phone, website. Interesting. I have my website. Not marking in 401k because I have my net pay. 401k is the bigger number from your gross. So if you're just using your paychecks, your net pay that hits your checking account, don't include your 401k as an expense. If you do it at the gross level before anything comes out of your paycheck, the big number, then you could put 401k, but it's more complicated than that. So simple budgeting uses just the net pay to start with. Otherwise, you can track your balance in the 401k as part of your, net worth. Okay, so 500 into my Roth IRA, nothing into savings. Okay. What do we have here? Roth IRA, nothing that month. So I hadn't yet automated, it looks like. Oh my gosh. That I could have lunch, a group lunch, eating out for only $7. Oh my goodness. I mean, a lot of eating out. I don't see a return to savings here. Okay, so I'm parking tickets. Geez, guys. I'm living pretty high on the hog, I'd say. And I don't see any um categorizing done. And I don't see a lot of savings. So, oh, here we go. Catching up in October. Look at this, undocumented expenses. So I made an estimate, right? And I probably hopefully overestimated. So I think that's another, concept to this is like at a certain point, you got to do the best you can do. Um yeah, great. I mean, I won't belabor this. If you guys want to see more of these, I can go through 2011, 2012, 2013. Looks like I don't have 14 and 15, but I have 16, 17. I may have more data in there. But I think it's really interesting to see. I also think it's pretty fascinating to me that let's say we took out savings, so 45,000, and let's say 5,000 of that was savings, 40 grand, and then another 12 to 15,000 for living expenses. So what is that? So 40, 1, 2, 3 minus I'm going to say 15,000 for like utilities and stuff, and then divided by 12. I probably spend less than this amount on myself now. If you take out my housing and utilities, which is now a mortgage and utilities, and leave this amount, so $2,083 per month spend on like clothing, eating out, just for me. I have a family and kids now, so it's a little bit different, but just like my core spend, so my portion of eating out or my portion of the Target bill, I'd probably spend less than this on myself each month. So I had a higher quality of expensive lifestyle in my 20s, but I spend way more now. I probably spend double or triple this total because I have two minor age children. I have a husband. We have businesses. We have a bigger house. And so core net spend on me is the same or less. This actually has not changed much at all. It only has gone down. So even when I got married, like that's how I like to separate it out. Like you have housing expense and you have what you spend on yourself. And what you spend on yourself is really that feeling of richness, you know? So I probably don't feel as wealthy as I do now, even though I'm precipitously more wealthy. compared to my 20s, because I could travel whenever I wanted. I could go on trips. I knew how to be budgety and frugally and save and scrimp. And oh, well, I could like make a sandwich for lunch the next day. I could eat peanut butter and jelly before I knew the difference between eating for macros. And things like that. So be aware that that's a reality of being a grown up too sometimes, depending on what your goals are. So I think this is an interesting exercise. It's fascinating to me. It's also 2010 is 14 years ago, and thankfully this figure has increased a lot, and the complexity has increased. I don't know how I would do recreating this manually in my life now. The complexities are pretty high. There's a book, Die Broke. It's backwards, but it's an older book and it recommends paying cash for everything, literally writing yourself a check on Sunday afternoon, probably Monday morning or Monday afternoon, going to the bank for what you need for the month and cashing that check to yourself. And the bank gives you the cash, comes out of your checking account, and that's what you use to spend. Interesting exercise. I'm sure I'd want to try it at some point. For sure, I would spend less, I think. In addition, I've gone to just debit card, pre-funding a debit card to pay expenses before. I did that for months in my household, primarily, I think, during COVID and coming out of COVID. That worked to reduce our spend too, right? So there are these strategies in today's complex world, though. It's like, how do we even implement some of these strategies? And I think none of those even matter until you have some semblance of like, what am I spending? You know? And this is the figure that matters, right? It's not how much, look at how much variability 3,900, 2,700, 4,100, 5,300, right? The the month over month figure, if you were just saying, this is what I spent last month, now I know everything, the data you get by tracking an entire year's expenses and then dividing by 12. So the average is 3813. So if I had used my March spend figure as my target or June, I would be completely undershooting how much I'm actually spending, right? I'm actually spending compared to August nearly double, double. So I do think it's an important variable to understand that you have to look at 12 months of spend divided by 12. If you're a homeowner, it is increasingly complicated because you might replace your roof for $30,000 once every 15 years. But are you considering so 2,000 per year should be saved for your future roof or $167 a month? Are you counting that? Probably not. Most people aren't. You can call it major or minor home repairs and have a savings budget where you put 200 a month into because you know over time you're going to use that as your own personal credit card. Money you put away, it's earning interest or invested that you can bring back into your ecosystem. So planning gets significantly easier and in some ways harder once you have this data. I don't think everybody needs to do this. I think it's helpful for me, and it was and still is. I have different tools available to me now, but I always want to experiment. I think I would be fascinated to write myself a check each week for the money I'm going to spend and only use cash. Considering I buy most of my items online, please don't come at me on that. It's just my life. I do buy groceries online. I make a lot of online transactions. I don't even know if I could pay some of my bills in cash. So there's that level of complexity. I think I would just spend less just because it's harder to spend cash than any other way. So that's interesting. So it's funny to think about, but quite a reflection at looking at things. Really good insight and understanding how much I spend um, less on myself now than I did in my 20s, even though I make about 3 times as much ish. It's kind of complicated. So this is fascinating. I think if you're starting out, especially if you're in college and this number is always negative, It's still a good exercise. You can even hide the income so you don't see it, or hide the net so you don't see it so it's not demoralizing. But if you're not, having a way to track all your expenses, I think that's something to consider. What else are you going to do? If you don't have a lot of money, you're in a perfect position to have more time to be doing this exercise. And you have fewer transactions than you may have in your life. I don't have, like, look at January. Is that a good example? So 43 rows was the July we looked at. 40 times spending money. And maybe there's like an aggregate amount 40 times a month. That's like 1.5 times, 1.3 times per day I'm spending money. That's pretty surprising. Today I have hundreds of transactions and things going on. So, um, yeah, very, very fascinating stuff. Hopefully you got to see insight into a little bit of my mind and how I work, and took some helpful things away on what you can implement. Google Spreadsheets became even more amazing because I stopped collecting my receipts and I could just put it in my phone. I could pull up Google Spreadsheets originally on the browser on my phone and then on the actual app. And I could be editing this on the go, on the train, or if I had a free moment, I could just add it's again 1.3 transactions a day to add is not a lot of data. I'm just laughing because how many transactions my life sees now. It's fascinating. So, well, thanks for watching and hope you learned something today. And again, like and subscribe. Leave me comments on future topics that you want me to go over. I'm going to get more into planning topics as well. Just want to make sure I'm using generic and anonymized data. Again, none of this is investment advice. In fact, all the investments you saw went up and down. There's no way to time the market. So keep all that in mind. Thanks again. See you soon.